Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Today we are going into the world of alchemy. Now you might think, oh hang on, that sounds like a bit of sorcery. But don't get confused. This is nothing to do with sorcery, the murky depths of the dark forces. None of that. This is the positive world of alchemy. And my guest is an author, he is a philosopher, he is a master of science, no less. He's also a husband and father, it says on the back of his amazing book, which I have read, and he sent it to me, very kind, A Fool's Wisdom. And you may want to read it too. I couldn't put it down, actually. I thought it was absolutely fantastic, and I thought we've got to get him on the show. And here he is. His name is Stephen Young, and he joins me now. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, Richard. Thank you very
Thank,
much for having me on the show.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming on the show. Yes, you sent me the book very kindly, and I got into it very quickly. And of course, you were dispelling a number of the things in science, and then you moved on to the fascinating world of alchemy. And what you gave to me as a reader reminded me how science has become this new religion, and that the science is fixed, we've heard a few times, and alternative views are sort of so poo-pooed, especially when it gets into something that's a little bit more spiritual or a bit more magical or a bit more ethereal. Then people are so fixed on, oh well, prove it, and I need to see the mathematical theoretical nonsense that puts that into, make it real, even though we're also told that science is a bit complicated and don't worry about it. We'll do all the thinking for you. You just take our a word that things like man-made global warming is a thing, or certain viruses flying around need certain medical treatment. So let's just talk a little bit about why science is not necessarily as helpful as we've all been led to believe, because you are, as it says on your book, you're a master of science, and you've been studying science most of your life, and you've almost thrown it away.
Yes. I guess, saying about science being a religion. Now, I obviously didn't think that when I was in the throes of it, studying the science, and even in the years after. But it wasn't until, I started questioning some of the fundamental truths that you see how people react to that. And, there's this sort of like foaming at the mouth, like opposition to certain questions, certain topics, which, things such as the shape and motion of the earth, for example, or, viruses and things like that. They invoke an emotional response from the people who are still working in the system and working with science. And yeah, it does start to look like a bit of a religion. And I, I mean, I love science truly, and that's the reason I wrote this book, is because I put a lot of time and effort and money into learning science, taking it as far as I could. I did a PhD in theoretical nuclear physics, which I thought was this, very advanced and would ultimately be a very useful qualification in life. But, turned out after I left academia to have no real use in the real world. I think a lot of people go through that when they leave university. They end up getting a job where they're just, doing spreadsheets or writing code or something like that. And all this like wonderful theory they were taught just seems to have no application in the real world. So I went through that, and it's been over 20 years since I left university now. And really just, with everything that happened in the last 4 years with COVID and all that, I took a really scrutinized my scientific education, and really went to town, started like questioning it rigorously, and felt like it was time to like hold it to account and say, what really works and what really doesn't. And the way that we understand whether or not science is good is, and this is a biblical quote, is to look to the fruits. Actually look at what the science is producing, what is the fruits of the labor that these scientists are doing. And so with 20 years, benefit of, looking at the world, learning the world for 20 years after leaving university, I could find no real applications or benefits of the science that I was taught at university. And so I basically go through and, debunk theoretical science in physics, chemistry, and biology. because I found there is this separation between the theoretical and the practical, and we think it's all tied together beautifully. The theory and the practice,
Mm.
they're all works together. But what I found is the theory sort of sits in its own kind of space, like a sort of mental space, whereas the practical stuff just gets on with it. Engineers and all that, they just get on with like making stuff and solving problems. But the theorists are just sitting in offices, writing equations, solving equations with computer code and so on, but nothing ever comes out of it. There's no fruits.
Right.
That's really how I was able to sort of peel it apart.
So one of the things that you say, which of course is quite striking for people, I think, to accept early on, is that you say you don't believe that there is anything such as an atom. That atom. I mean, you can't hold an atom in your hand and say it's there, because you have to do a theoretical equation effectively, because microscopes can't really see it in the same way that you would expect.
Yes, yeah. So, things become very atomic with physics education. When you start out, say, like at the beginning of secondary school, it starts out quite practical. You learn about mechanics of falling objects and electricity and things like this, heat and so on. But then it starts to get more complex and more atomist, if you like, as you get into higher education and then university education. It was all atomic physics and quantum physics. And so I was very much in that world. And then with my PhD, I was in nuclear physics. So I was working at that level. But again, all modeling, just computer modeling and equations and so on. Um, and so I uh, I never saw a nucleus, right? I never saw a neutron or a proton or an electron or really any evidence of that. But I didn't even think about that at the time because I just
Right.
assumed people were working with them. So I really, with this book, I tried to understand, say in the same way with viruses, it's like, have these things actually been isolated? Does anybody actually work with them in any hands-on way, or is it just an interpretation of the data? Is it just like a lens through which people view things rather than being an actual thing in reality? And of course, when I started looking for proof of, actual real physical satisfactory proof of atoms, I couldn't find it. Uh, and and yeah, and this, I guess, led me to write this book where I question not only atoms, but the shape and motion of the Earth, the model of cosmology that we're given, as well as modern medicine and some sacred cows in biology and that as well. So I tried to bring it all
Yeah.
together because it is actually all related. What I found, like physics, chemistry, and biology are like new subjects. They were created in sort of like the 17th century, but before that, it was all united. It was like natural philosophy, alchemy. Um, there were all the sciences were like under one banner, and there was a spiritual dimension to it as well. But then it was fragmented into physics, chemistry, and biology, and the spiritual component was taken out of it completely. So it became kind of an atheistic creed.
And that's very much where we are, and that's sort of very much the utilized against us in many ways with the narrative that's pushed over for certain problems that we have. I mean, we're being threatened with nuclear war at the moment, and you think, well, actually, if there's no such thing as an atom, you can't split the blooming thing. So where would the power come from taking something very, very tiny and going snip? How is it that that would suddenly create something very, very big? And so therefore, why are we worried? But it may be that actually it's massive numbers of explosions. We know that they can create explosives, but it may not be an atom that's splitting an atom that's doing it.
Yes, yeah. So the atomic or nuclear aspect of the bomb, just makes it sound a lot scarier. Um, we've had this sort of threat of like Soviet nuclear war, has been hanging over us for like 60 years or something now. And
Yeah.
they still talk about it on the news. I saw last week the new rocket, like Satan 2, it's called.
Oh,
Did you see
lovely.
that? Satan 2.0, yeah, it's nuclear rocket. It's just waiting to come and destroy us all. But when you really get down to it, like, if you're going to get blown up and killed, does it really matter if it's a nuclear bomb or just a regular bomb? I mean, either way, everything blows up and you're dead, right? It's like it doesn't really matter. But nuclear sounds scarier.
Mm.
So, the question is, well, with the bombs that have been dropped, say the Hiroshima and the Nagasaki, were they really nuclear or were they just bombs? And there's been a number of investigations into this. There was a guy called Michael Palmer who did a study where he concluded it was napalm and mustard gas that was actually in those bombs. So, the bombs were big, they were destructive, obviously caused a lot of destruction. But the key thing is there was no nuclear fallout. And that would really be the only way to determine that the blast was a
Yes.
nuclear blast and not just a regular blast.
That is quite a key component, isn't it? To have the nuclear fallout afterwards, that all the sheep were having strange babies, or that people had two heads or something after, the survivors would be. Because we kept hearing that with Chernobyl and stuff. And it did strike me, actually, if you didn't want people anywhere near somewhere, just say there's been a bit of a nuclear leak and everyone will just stay well clear, won't they?
That's right, yeah. And then, of course, it came out with that Chernobyl had actually continued operating for like 14 years after the accident. There was like still another part of the plant that was like still online, and people were still working there, like not far from it. And with Fukushima, without going into the details, that seems to have been a completely like calculated, funded misinformation campaign there. So basically, all these like so-called proofs of nuclear theory, they tend to be really sketchy, when you start looking into them. Like a lot of the old videos of the nukes
Right.
blowing up and stuff, but the camera doesn't even shake, and
Well, exactly, yes.
there's a lot of
So
like, yeah.
one wonders if we're not due another so-called demonstration of the power of nuclear any day now, just so that we remain frightened of it.
Yeah, yeah,
Otherwise, because if we do get too complacent and go, well, it's not really nuclear, it's just high explosives. Even though, as you say, the damage can be the same, but nuclear does sound a lot more scary. And if you don't have to blow the place up, then it's, you just keep control by fear, which is obviously what a lot of science has been used for.
yes. I mean, yeah, because the nuclear threat is a kind of it's an ultimate power in a way. I mean, that's what it was sold as, like like the big red button that the
Yes.
president can press to like destroy the entire world, kind of thing. So it's a yeah, it's like an ultimate fear, an ultimate power, and I just think it's just been like hung over our heads for so long now. But there's really no evidence that these bombs are any like special type of energy, just regular explosions, but big ones, but just normal explosions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you do some, and it's the first, your book is in two halves, and you spend a bit of time, and I was really interested in the dispelling of certain myths, because certain tropes that you hold as being true because someone else has told you all these years, like with the atom and various other things, and I don't want to spoil too much of what's in there. You think, bloody hell, okay. And then you get to the second half of the book, which is where we get into that much more curious world where you kind of connect to it, because it's almost the world of dreams in a way,
Mhm.
because there's a spiritual connection, there's a magical connection, and it isn't just this hard and fast, we know the answers, leave well alone, it's science, it's fixed, it's immutable. You get into this, well, as I say, this sort of almost semi-world of dreams of things. Well, what is possible? Who are we? What can we do? What can we achieve? In the world of alchemy. And you do talk about the difference between alchemy and sorcery. So I thought that would be an interesting place to say, because some people might think, well, if it's magic, then that's sorcery.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I'm careful not to use the word magic with alchemy because I find it's like actually very, very practical, and actually quantum physics is more like magic to me now because the way with quantum physics, they will, if someone's talking to you about quantum physics or if they're explaining something to you in terms of quantum physics, they literally take you into another world to do it. They take you into the quantum world and then start explaining things to you in terms of all these quantum particles and things like that that you can't ever see or ever prove existed. So
Right.
it is kind of like a magic spell in a way. You're being, yeah, you're being like taken into this imaginary world, and told a story, and then you just have to accept it. But what I found with alchemy, because it's rooted in the four elements: fire, earth, air, and water, it's actually very practical because each of those can be measured, they can be felt, they can be held in your hands, and things like this. Um, and just for explaining things, like as a coming from the point of view of being a theoretical physicist, I thought I was going to be able to explain everything, but I found the physics explanations just were not cutting it. They didn't really work in reality. Like if you consider the human being, for example, if you think of a human being as being made from atoms, it's a hideously complicated problem, right? Because you're talking about trillions and trillions of atoms all like hanging together by invisible forces, and it's just horrendous to think about how that could possibly work. But when you think of the human being in terms of fire, earth, air, and water, it's actually really simple. It all breaks down. We have body heat, we have fire in us, so like our body heat, our voice, and things like this. Our divine spark. We have water in us with all the liquids, the blood, the cerebral spinal fluid, sweat and tears, and semen, and all these things. We have water in us. We have the earth, which is the bones and your flesh and all this, and we have air. We breathe in the air to like keep us going. So suddenly, like, something as complex as the human being becomes actually very simple to understand in terms of these four elements. But if you try to understand it in terms of electrons, protons, and neutrons, it's just an impossibly complex problem. You know, so yeah, so it was kind of like, for me, not magic. It was actually like real. It's like as real as you can get. In fact, I can't think of anything more real than fire, earth, air, and water. Like
Yes.
they're the realest things we have.
And we encounter those every day, and so we're very familiar with them, as opposed to the magical world of quantum physics, of which we're told is the new science, as it were,
Yeah,
that we cannot touch or reach out to. We can't burn our fingers on it, whereas you can with a fire.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, you have this, they say quantum mechanics. And it's funny with this word mechanic because it's a very practical word, right? Like you go to a mechanic who like fix your car and, build things and, sort problems and stuff. But, a quantum mechanic actually can't do anything, can't fix anything. And I know because I was one and I came out of university, keen to get a job, but I realized I couldn't do anything that was really of any value to anyone. And the people who are still doing it, they're in university, they're receiving funding to continue their research. But I would wager with any of them, and I've spoken to some physicists who are still working in universities, but if their funding dried up, they wouldn't be able to continue with their work in any way, shape, or form because it's not actually a value to anyone in the world. Like you couldn't make it a business because nobody needs it. You know
Well,
what I
that's
mean?
yeah. It's like, could I have a quantum something? Well, we are often hear about these quantum computers that are now running big systems. But is there anything much more than still the same semiconductors and printed circuit boards and just faster technology than anything really on a quantum level?
I don't believe so. So, I mean, I first started hearing about quantum computers in like 1994, 1996 even. Um, and, I've followed the narrative, for nearly 30 years. And, the public demonstrations of quantum computing are really weak. I mean, they just show you a fancy looking box and then they tell you all the stuff around it. And the stuff they tell you is the same stuff they were telling you 30 years ago, actually, all the theory about how it can be in two states at once. And but again, it's kind of well, firstly, it's a black box. Even now, 30 years, it's just a black box, right? They'll just say it does amazing things, but they won't actually demonstrate its power. Um, but the quantum computer, again, like the nuclear bomb, is a kind of ultimate power because what they say we'll be able to do is to crack all the codes, all the passwords, right? Because it is somehow able to just like supersede all the normal computing processes using quantum magic, and it will hack everyone's password and everyone's bank account and steal everyone's secrets like that, right? So it's kind of an ultimate power in computing terms, but no, I do not believe they exist. I think it's another sort of nuclear bomb type of a situation. um, where they just kind of hang it there, to make us think that they're working on it, this kind of
Mm.
ultimate power. But 30 years and no progress whatsoever. I mean, technology progresses fast. You know this yourself. I mean, we've seen it in our lifetime, just how fast things have progressed technologically. But the idea that quantum computers has not progressed at all. Uh,
Let me. I just want to intersperse this question because I often get people talk about this a lot. If quantum and atoms and all that aren't the thing, are we still? Where does energy and vibration come into it? Because I hear about this all the time. We are energy and we're vibration, and the atoms are moving around, and we influence that. And people talk about the spiritual side of manifesting or creating an environment. And is everything that we see here when we turn our backs on it, Schrodinger's cat type situation, does the tree actually fall in the forest, all that sort of stuff. So where are you with this energy and vibration, or is that another load of old nonsense?
no, energy and vibration's all good. Yeah. I mean, in my PhD, the work I actually did was, I mean, to cut it short, I mean, without going too deep into it, what I ended up realizing was that the wave theory, the wave equations in quantum physics all work very well. So quantum physics has some usefulness for making measurements and predicting the outcomes of measurements. And the real calculations, when you get down to it, is all waves. It's all wave equations, just like the simple harmonic oscillator. And actually, all the models of the atoms are based in wave theory and so on. But where I think they've gone wrong is the belief in the particles, the atom.
Right.
So I would say that the what they're calling an atom is actually a vibrational phenomenon. I talk about the vortex in the book, like how the vortex has its own shape and its own sort of speed, and it's like independent from the rest of the water, but it's not a particle. It's not a hard, solid thing. It's a kind of motion.
Mm.
And so, yeah, so actually, wave equations, wave mechanics works very well in physics, and all good physics is based on that. But quantum physics is based on this idea of particles, and it leads to all these paradoxes. So one of the things about quantum physics is it has all these like weird like paradoxes and conundrums and things you just can't, you kind of scratch your head. You're like, whoa, what is, and the reason for all of that is because they insist that the particles exist. And so
Right.
if it's just waves, everything is fine. But when you insist that it's a wave and a particle, then you introduce this duality and this kind of mystical two things.
So I'm just trying to think of it. So is it a bit like starlings when they do their murmuration? You've got a wave of stuff going, but they're saying, but that's because each individual starling are the particles in that murmuration.
Um,
Is that a bad analogy? Probably.
well, no, yeah, I see what you mean. Well, yeah,
Because you see the murmuration go and you go, well, what's controlling that? Because they all seem to have a hive mind of some description. They're all going and they're not out of kilter or anything. But so we see a wave, but if you focus in on it, the wave is made up of individual particles, and maybe that's what they're sort of going. But
yeah, I would.
but that's a real life wave of real objects
Yeah,
or
yeah,
living
those are
living
actually
beings.
sort of atomized, in that there's individual starlings, but then there's
Yes.
also this overarching pattern. But with the atoms, I mean, it comes down to this idea of ether from alchemy. So the ether is the fifth element. They call it the fifth element, or the quintessence, which is really the element from which all the other elements came. So the idea is that space itself is not empty, and even modern scientists will say that now as well, that space is not empty. It's a medium, it's a fluid medium, and so there's able to be like currents of movement within that medium, and those currents can basically form like knots. And there is actually a theory from the turn of last century called the vortex theory of the atom, in which they explained it exactly this way, as like knots in the ether. So uh, essentially saying that like the atoms are a product of movement in the ether, but they're not themselves these indivisible hard balls, which is what the original concept of the atom was. It was like indivisible hard balls. And the reason it's significant is because um, to say that everything is made from atoms is actually to reject the creator, to reject the spirit, to reject the human soul, and to reject the ether. All of these things are completely thrown out the window when you believe in atoms. And so it's not just a theory of physics. It is actually a religious, worldview that's like formalized and coded into it.
Yes.
Uh,
And so, well, let's move on to that world that we'll leave them and their sort of hard-nosed, cold, calculating world of atoms, which does, as you say, removes the creator and the spirit, and return to the much more warm and cuddly version of which does speak to me, the alchemy. I mean, I think as you grow up, you start to question again. I mean, when I was younger, I questioned who am I, what am I doing here, and what is this world, and I used to love making fires, and it was great fun. I was a bit of a pyromaniac as a kid. I'd just have bonfires, not car fires or building fires, just so if anyone thought. And I used to love playing with the elements, getting into water and feeling water, going for swimming, and all those sort of things, which is in a way very well. It's physical, but there's another layer to it which is very hard to put your finger on that makes you want to do these things. So one of the things I was looking in the book was as I was understanding and going through all the different parts of alchemy as you were sort of breaking it down, is what do I take away from this as a living being, as a spiritual being? I mean, the ether seemed to be a very important part of it, as you explained. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about that, and why we should be focusing more on the sort of, not. I joked before we started filming that I had a big pile of base metal here, and I wanted you to produce a whole load of gold so that we, can be free of the fiat currency rubbish. But that's how a lot of people think of alchemy. They go, oh, it's just about transmutation of one bad metal into one delightful metal, but it's so much more. So I've just talked for a whole load of rubbish there. Maybe I should just get you to sort of bring us why we should be thinking about alchemy as something to look at.
well, I just believe it's very empowering and helps you to understand things in a really simple way, and helps you to work creatively. So, I mean, I wasn't a creative person when I was in university. In fact, I used to look at artists and musicians and just be like, how the hell did they do that? How did they make that? Just produce this like art out of themselves. It was like a total mystery because I was so into the sort of physics side of things. But ultimately, I became a successful musician as it seemed like music was an application of physics for me. But when I started reading alchemy, it helped me make sense of both physics and music in a much more simplistic way. And I came to the conclusion that making music is a form of alchemy. And I developed something called audio alchemy, which was a system for making music using alchemical principles. And really, the aim with that was just to like help people and make music more easily, but also help them to understand alchemy in the process. And in doing so, I came to, so there's these 7 steps in alchemy, or 7 processes. And this can be used to make a seven step process for making anything, really. And I use it for making music. You could use it for, well, it's used, for example, in making whiskey and vodka and things like this. Spirits actually go through 7 distinct steps of purification in the distillery that correspond with alchemy. So there's like, alchemy being done in the production of beer and wine and spirits, but also just in food in general, in cooking. Whenever you're taking like a raw ingredient or a set of raw ingredients and you're purifying and processing them and combining them and, refining them, you're doing alchemy. I mean, that's really all it is. It's and that's
The
where
the
chemistry came
the
from. You know?
the thing that really impressed me, actually, I just remember something. It was a moment in there, and I was reading it, and I just wanted to sort of whilst I remember this, is you're talking about alchemy because it's about being creative.
Mhm.
It's creating something from nothing, and you even say, I'm creating it now as I write this very book. I am creating, and I remember reading that and thinking, yeah, of course. This is, to me, is why we're here, to be creative, because if we're just here to consume all the time and do nothing else, well, what was the point of that? We leave something, whether that is you've left children to carry on,
Yeah.
or you've created some art or some music or whatever it is, a podcast or something, and the satisfaction that you get from that creation of, blimey, I've made something, then that made me think of all the craftsmen of the past who do so many different things, from cobblers and butchers and bakers who created, might be everyday objects, but from simple ingredients, from a field of corn, they've created some bread. And that to me was what was the essence behind the alchemy, is this incredible process. Would you say that's right?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Making bread, a good example. I use the example of making a cup of tea in the book, that there's four steps of alchemy in making a cup of tea. You have to obviously collect the tea leaves and dry them. That's which is an application of fire or heat to dry the leaves. And then you dissolve them in the hot water, which is a dissolution, and to extract the essence of the tea out of the leaves. And then you have to remove the leaves from the water, which is a separation, as the third step of alchemy, is to separate, because you don't actually want the leaves in the final product. You just wanted the essence that was in the leaves. And so then once you take the tea bag out of the cup, and then you get, say, the milk and the honey or whatever you have in your tea, you then combine that together. And that's a conjunction where you're like bringing separate elements together, stirring, adding the vortex, brings them all together into a new thing. And then you now have your cup of tea. You made four distinct alchemical steps. You've used fire, earth, air, and water in the making of it. And people do that every morning, knowing nothing about alchemy. But
Yes.
it just shows how how grounded alchemy is, and how we take part in it all the time, without even really knowing it. So I'm just trying to help people like come to a more conscious understanding of these processes that we use every day. They're used in industry, they're used in food and drink, they happen inside our body. Digestion, for example, is the alchemical process of fermentation. You have all your organs are doing alchemical processes. Yeah, it's just really to help people have a clearer understanding of who and what we are, and how things.
So would you say you're sort of demystifying it? Because I suppose when you talk of alchemists, you have this, we have had the narration, the narrative of these guys excluded away, and you've got in the book, I think, some pictures of the alchemists' cave, or their workshop, and their beds over here, and they're working, and smoke and fire and water is all doing these things. But actually, as you say, when we're in the kitchen making a cup of tea, we are the alchemist. It's just there isn't that sort of over imagined, smoke and mirrors going on.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I mean, around the 16th century, and that the alchemists were making these wonderful artworks. A lot of them, rather than writing books, they would make these artworks where they would sort of show everything that they were doing, but it was hidden. There's a kind of occultism, which, excuse me, people think is kind of a bad thing, but it's really about communicating the knowledge while also kind of keeping it hidden. So they want to teach people, they want people to understand what they understand, but at the same time they have to kind of keep it hidden, because it's maybe the church or the government and stuff like that don't want you knowing about it. So they would make these wonderful drawings that were very cryptic. And I've been looking at this for over 10 years now, and I can still I can still look at an alchemical artwork, and it's hard to decipher. It takes time. It's like, I can't do it easily. They sort of hid the knowledge very well, but it's also just right there. It's like hidden in plain sight.
And what would you say they're trying to tell us?
Um, well, they say the goal of alchemy is the philosopher's stone, which is a substance that can give you good health, like long life, and I mean they say immortality, which is quite extreme, but it's that sounds quite extreme, but it's basically good health, long life, eternal youth, if you like, um, and
Well,
so
a lot of people would certainly agree with all those things, but although if you've got to live in the world that's the way it is at the moment, you might not want to live for that long,
yeah,
forever in the oppressive world, unless you knew that there was a chance you could change it, of course,
yeah, sure.
which I think we all are.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's also sort of referred to as the universal medicine. So I mean, it's a pretty interesting idea, and a lot of the alchemy stuff seems to be centered around that. But with the lead into gold, which the Philosopher's Stone is said to help catalyze the process of lead into gold. So, I've read, for example, detailed accounts of a group of people like getting together and like melting down the lead in the forge and stuff like that, and then someone comes with their little bit of the philosopher's stone and like sprinkles it in, and then then they cool it down, and then it turns into gold. But I mean I don't know, I don't know, I've not done at that kind of level. But what I find with the lead into gold thing is it's actually symbolic. It's symbolic of taking something raw, something some abundant natural resource, and actually transmuting it into something which is you know useful, beautiful. Like gold is symbolic of the goal of the work. So, in the case of music, right, you're starting with nothing. You maybe just have a few musical instruments or some sounds or something, and then you've got to work it and work it and work it until you have a song that's professional, it sounds good at the end. That would be the gold.
Mm.
It's not literally metallic gold, but it's the end product of the work.
And if you sold enough, you'd get a gold disc.
Yeah. Yeah, so like when
Which,
you're making food, the gold is the meal that you sit
yes.
down, on the table, or in the case of whiskey, the gold would be like the bottled whiskey,
Mm.
like after it's been matured and distilled and fermented and gone through all these different processes. Um, so
So I mean, it is very much about the coming up with something that is very real, even though you could say music is, you can't hold music and you can't, but you can clearly hear it, and it changes your emotions, and you can join in with it, you can dance to it, and all those sort of things. Do you think, that, I mean, we looked at science there, and it seems a very cold, calculating sort of religion now. With the advent of things like AI, virtual reality, people being stuck behind screens, responsibility for their lives. People don't have to make things anymore to a certain degree. We if you go back 100 years ago, you very much had to. You didn't have electricity, and so to light the fire, and you couldn't just turn the gas on. Perhaps 150 years ago, whatever. Now, so much is done for us that the alchemistic approach to life is almost, well, you just flick the switch on the wall and the light goes on, or you don't even have to flick it. You can just say the name of a certain product, which I'm not going to do because many people's lights will suddenly go on or off. Elvira, turn the light on, whatever it is, and these things do it all for. Is there a fear that we're losing stuff? We're losing that connection with the physical world.
yes, for sure. I mean, the stuff that's now automated like through AI and that, like for me, so I was making digital music, so you're using digital software to make music, not realizing that the whole time, there's going to be this AI which is able to analyze everyone's digital projects, like every music project, every art project, and now so this AI is able to make art and music that's sounds convincing, perhaps to the untrained ear. I mean, I haven't heard any impressive AI music myself yet, but
That's a relief.
certainly some art. You think, wow, yeah, it's able to produce that so fast, and it's because it's trained on all the work that everyone's been doing for the last 30 years, like making art on computers. And maybe in some way it's cool that we are able to now benefit from all that work. You know, we can all benefit from it together. I'm not opposed to AI, but yes, the danger is that people think that they neglect the creative process. So they think it's just about the end result. It's just about getting the end result and making the money as fast as possible, and they don't actually value the process of creating something.
Mm.
And the alchemists talk about this because actually, when you create something, you're changing yourself as well. You're transforming yourself in the process of making something. You know, it's they say that art and the artist are inseparable. Um,
Yes, I think that's very, very true. I mean, we recently, my partner, the lovely Julia, paid for an artist to paint her. She's different from just a quick digital photograph at 125th of a second. It's like 4 hours she was sitting there, and the art and the artist, the sitter and the artist, there's something rather magical about the painting because it isn't 100% likeness in the way that a picture is very stark and gone, there's a snap in time. This is a 4 hour snap in time. So if you'd had a camera that was on a very slow exposure, you might have the lens off, and 4 hours you'd get something, and you've got time coming in, and you've got another person's interpretation, which makes it one of those things. And it's funny, isn't it? Because you look at art that's been crafted, you stand in front of it for a long time. A photograph, you do kind of go, oh, that's interesting, and ditch it.
mhm.
And I do think that the art, and I mean, what you just said there was extremely poignant.
Yeah. Well, alchemy is called the art. You know, capital T, the
Right.
art. And it's also called the work, or the great work, or the work. Um, and you know, it's sort of based on this idea that like nature only can take things so far, and then humanity has to help nature to take things to their highest expression. So, you know, for example, like a cloth, you know, fibers, right? It's like nature will produce fibers in the form of cotton or, you know, linen or whatever, but it takes human beings to like spin the fibers into the cloth to actually, you know, make clothes from it. So, yeah, alchemy.
And the inspiration, isn't it? You've got a woolly sheep, and you think, if I was to, because somebody somewhere, and not just one person, but I'm sure many people have gone, actually, if you pull this apart, and maybe if I had a thing, and then I could, and a number of people came together to knit a jumper, for example. You think how many elements of human inspiration came to point to something that we all stick on when it's cold now, but at some point in history, all those different bits of inspiration from trial and error of how you're going to card this wool or take cotton and turn it into a sheet so you can sleep on something without being cold or dirty. I mean, it's that's we do it, and we just don't give it the praise or the acknowledgement of what we've really achieved, because nature wouldn't do that.
Yeah, that's it. Nature is much more rough, right? It's like it takes the human labor to sort of smooth it out and refine it into these like fine garments and stuff. And cloth is actually kind of a sacred thing, even though we take it for granted. There's so much of it now, but when you really start to think of it in terms of like every individual like weave and you know where each thread came from and how it had to be processed and all that kind of stuff, it's like it's a collaboration between nature and man.
Mm.
And that was really the essence of alchemy. And I think what's happened with the science that we got in school, this kind of atheistic science, is that the progress of science has gone down this road of like sort of anti-nature and anti-life. So it's now all about dominating nature or controlling nature or exploiting nature, whereas the alchemists were interested in helping nature, right? Seeing that like nature and man are part of the same system, and like nature will take things so far, and then humanity has to take over and take it the rest of the way. So yeah, it's a nice philosophy, I think, that's like empowering for artists and scientists alike, you know?
And everyday people who like cups of tea.
Yeah, yeah. Even if you just like
You know,
tea and
but
a
that
wee
I mean
whiskey.
that because we're all we are all creative beings. It's just very often we think that we're not, because we see a piece of art or we hear a piece of music and you think, oh, I could never do that, and we're then suddenly are very self-limiting to what we can do, because we haven't in a way listened to our heart or our minds or whatever, or not been inspired to try something, and then suddenly you've got a bit of clay. But you do that with children, and they're immediately creative. It's just so instinctive, isn't it? And they'll take that clay and the alchemy that they suddenly create from nothing, a lump of clay, and they might go, well, and then they'll do the random things you're not expecting by, breaking all the rules, by going, well, I'll make a monster, but I'm going to add this to it, and I'm going to add this to it, and you go, oh no, gosh, you're not supposed to do that. But kids do that without, because they've got no limits.
That's it. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the clay thing, like the potter, like making pots was really one of the sort of early like forms of alchemy. I mean, you're basically taking mud out of the ground and through the application of fire and water, you're sort of like molding it into this thing that has like function and utility, and it's like useful and like valuable for people. Um, so yeah, it's really in everything, like all kinds of work. I think I say that's why it's called the work,
The
because
work.
it's actually the basis of all work. Whether you know it or not, you're involved in some kind of alchemical work.
So your book is called A Fool's Wisdom, and I'll put a link in the description. But tell us why it's called A Fool's Wisdom.
Uh-huh.
That was
Yes.
yeah.
Well, I came to understand this kind of archetype of the fool, through the tarot deck. It's the first card in the tarot deck, or the zero card. And it's said that the tarot represents the sort of journey of the fool, because the first card is the fool and the last card is the world. So there's this sort of journey of the fool from, he's like this kind of innocent, playful, open-hearted character who's just on an adventure, and he's always depicted like walking off a cliff, which is a sort of symbol of faith, just
Yes.
like with Indiana Jones, right? The leap of faith when he walks off the cliff, and then there's an invisible bridge that you know hits him, and I very much related to that, as my life has been a lot like that. I've taken a lot of leaps of faith, as a musician, independent musician. Like sort of every time you go to a gig, every time you fly off to another country to do a show, it's like it's its own hero's journey. It's its own leap of faith. And I took it all very seriously, actually. But I realized that I was a fool. Literally, that the fool is this playful character, and I was essentially hired entertainment. Although I took my job quite seriously, making music and everything. Professionally, I was hired entertainment. I was hired to go and give people a good time and help them relax and have fun and all this. And it made me just take myself less seriously,
Mm.
but also like embrace the power that's actually in this archetype of the fool. It's not just a stupid man, right? We think a fool, a stupid man.
Yes.
Like it's not. It's like playful. It's faithful, and it's creative. And so yeah, I really embraced it. But also I knew when you get into conspiracies and you start questioning science and everything, people call you a fool, right? It's like
Yes.
they're like, you're a fool for looking at this, you're a fool. And so I've been called a fool many times in my life, and yeah, I really just wanted to just own it with this book. So it kind of became like the theme of the book.
Well, I can say it's a great read, to my audience there, and as I say, I'll put the link in the description. Do go and get it. Science, Conspiracies, and the Art of Alchemy. And you also run a YouTube channel.
Yes, it's a kind of a new venture for me. As I say, I was doing music before, and then I did a book, but I wasn't really much of a video guy. But this year, I started making some videos for YouTube, and I'm getting into it. And I actually just released a second edition of the book just this week, so it's greatly improved, sort of grammatically and syntactically. It's had eight whole months of the light of awareness and feedback and all that kind of thing. So I've greatly tightened up. It's a new and improved product with.
And just on the fact that you've you've revealed a few things that you don't believe in the science world. Did you get from your ex university friends and colleagues? You get a lot of stick from them saying, "What are you talking about? You don't believe in atoms and things."
Not yet. But it's been a long time. I mean, I haven't really spoken to anyone from back then for a long time.
Right. Oh, okay.
But I have had a number of like academics reach out to me. I had a call this week and last week with theoretical physicists from certain universities, and they get it. I mean, they're really starting to question things.
Oh, brilliant.
So yeah, I mean, things are changing. Hundreds of people have written to me, very grateful, from all different professions, chemists, doctors, physicists, entrepreneurs, alchemists, healers. Yeah,
Well, that's
literally,
fantastic, isn't it? That's
brilliant.
absolutely brilliant.
Because I was worried. I thought I'm just gonna get flamed. I'm just gonna get
Yes.
opposition. But actually, I've had a lot of support. There's a lot more people out there thinking along these lines than it seems.
Yeah.
So I'm quite glad.
No. Well done, you. Well done, you. Well, thank you for coming on the show and telling us all about it. And let's hope we get some sales and some views on your YouTube channel. I'm going to ask you, I probably got it on here. You got a website that we can send people to?
Yes, stephenyoung.uk, and that's
No.
Stephen with a V. I just wanted to also mention for folks down in England, I'm coming down on the 19th of January to give a full day of presentations near Exeter. So it's called
Oh, brilliant.
Talks. Yeah, the event.
19th of January. Get it in your diaries, folks.
Yeah, so I'll be. There's stuff about that on my Telegram channel. You can find all my links on my website. But yeah, looking forward to that.
Brilliant. Well, I'll put all those links in the description. So there we are, ladies and gentlemen. What do you make of that? The atom doesn't exist. There's no such thing as nuclear explosions. Thank you very much. The world. If you've made yourself a cup of tea this morning, you are an alchemist. Good for you. You have brought all those ingredients and used all those principles, which is fantastic. Stephen, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing that, and I hope you get lots of sales from the book. As I say, I read it very quickly because I couldn't put it down. So there you go. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. That's great. Thanks.
No, it's really good. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I'll be back with more monologues and more wonderful interviews. But that's it for today from Stephen and I. Thank you so much for watching. Till next time, goodbye.